What if I told you that the most dangerous person in any room is not the one screaming for attention, but the silent one in the corner who's been pushed too far? Stay with me, because what Carl Jung discovered about human psychology will definitely transform how you see empaths forever. Carl Jung said that every person carries within them both light and shadow. And nowhere is this more apparent than in the misunderstood empath. You know, many mistake empathy for weakness. But Jung's research discovered something much more complicated and truly disturbing. Here's what many individuals don't understand about empaths. And trust me, at the end of this video, you will never underestimate one again. According to Carl Jung, the human mind functions on many different levels. The persona, our public mask, often hides our real character. But what transpires when someone with outstanding emotional intelligence ultimately removes that mask? What Jung discovered about the shadow self will surprise you. Empaths live in what Jung called the tension of opposites. They feel everything strongly, but they've learned to contain that passion. They see through deceit, yet they prefer to believe in people's potential for good. This isn't naivety. It's what Jung called transcendent function, the capacity to hold contradictory realities simultaneously. But here's where it becomes dangerous, and why narcissists should be afraid. Carl Jung said that the most integrated people are those who faced their shadow and emerged whole. Empaths, through recurrent betrayal and deceit, are driven into this integration process early and more profoundly than most. They don't simply understand light, they deeply know darkness because they've been driven into it. The narcissist sees the empath as compassion and makes a terrible mistake. They think they're dealing with somebody vulnerable, someone controllable. But Jung discovered that people who lead from their hearts usually have the greatest psychological foundations. Why? Because they've had to evolve them to live. Listen attentively to what occurs next, because here is when the tables turn entirely. According to Carl Jung's concept of individuation, everyone must ultimately encounter their real self. For many people, this occurs slowly. But for empaths who've been wronged, this process accelerates fast. The pain becomes stimulation for what Jung called psychological rebirth. Here's what Jung understood that many people miss: emotional sensitivity isn't a vulnerability. It's better pattern recognition. Empaths don't only feel emotions. They decipher them, analyze them, and keep them. Each manipulation, each deception, and every act of emotional abuse gets catalogued in their psyche, not as resentment, but as data. And when that data hits a critical mass, that's when you experience something Jung called the development of the self. And it's definitely unstoppable. Carl Jung discovered that the most major changes occurred not in comfort, but in turmoil. He called this enantiodromia, the propensity for things to turn into something else when pushed to extremes. The empath who has been tolerant becomes unmovable. The person who is giving becomes discriminating. This isn't about being cold. Jung understood that genuine strength develops when a person integrates their shadow, when they acknowledge their ability for boundaries, for saying no, and for walking away. The empath doesn't lose their compassion, they gain their backbone. But here's what will totally blow your mind about what occurs next. According to Carl Jung, there's a difference between being subconsciously reactive and consciously reacting. Most individuals operate from their wounds. They lash out. They seek revenge. They try to hurt other people as they've been hurt. But the revolutionized empath? They operate from what Jung called conscious choice. They don't need to destroy their betrayer because they've achieved victory in a far more important battle, the one inside themselves. Jung said that the ultimate success is not conquering others, but conquering the parts of yourself that would bring you down to their level. And this is where the narcissist realizes they've made a critical mistake in judgment. Carl Jung observed that manipulators rely on predictable responses. They need you to chase, to clarify, and to fight for the relationship to exist. But when an empath reaches what Jung called intuitive autonomy, they become immune to these strategies. They stop playing the game completely. Jung found that the most effective position in any dynamic is detachment derived from understanding, not retreat derived from fear. The awakened empath doesn't withdraw because they're hurt. They step back because they finally see clearly. What occurs next will change everything you thought you understood about power dynamics. According to Carl Jung's research studies on psychological types, empaths have what he called feeling function domination. But this is not mental instability. It's sophisticated emotional intelligence. They can read between the lines and detect manipulation before it's even completely formed. But here's something that Jung identified: when this emotional intelligence blends with hard-earned knowledge, it generates something new. The empath stops being reactive and becomes strategic. They cannot function from pain anymore. They function from power, and the change that follows Jung had a specific term for, and it's definitely game-changing. Carl Jung called it the transcendent function, the capacity to hold on to tension without breaking, to see reality without becoming resentful, and to choose response over reaction. The empath who has been formed in an atmosphere of betrayal has this transcendent function at a level that most others never reach. They become what Jung called individuated, complete unto themselves. They no longer require external approval to recognize their value. They no longer seek validation from others to trust their perceptions. They stop being dependent on anybody who doesn't appreciate their depth. But here's the part that will send shivers down your spine. According to Carl Jung, there's a phenomenon he called psychological mirroring. Empaths often reflect back what other people project onto them. But when an empath has been betrayed several times, something changes. They stop reflecting and begin revealing. They see through the charm, the manipulation, and the fake apologies. They watch the trends play out with crystal clarity. And rather than absorbing the dysfunction, they start reflecting it back, not with malicious intent, but with reality. And truth, Jung understood, is the most dangerous weapon against deception. The final phase is what Jung called the return of the repressed, and it changes everything. Carl Jung discovered that when someone hides their actual power for too long, it finally erupts, not in chaos, but in apparent clarity. The empath who has been open-minded, understanding, and tolerant suddenly becomes stubborn. They don't fight anymore. They decide. They don't explain themselves. They don't try to mend what's broken. They withdraw themselves from the picture completely. This is not cruelty. It's what Jung called individuation in action. And here's when the psychology becomes truly intriguing. According to Carl Jung, the shadow encompasses not just our darkness but our unlived possibility. For empaths, this shadow usually contains their need for boundaries, their capacity to say no, and their strength to walk away. Betrayal forces them to cooperate with this shadow. To recover the parts of themselves they'd kept concealed. Jung observed that this integration doesn't make someone less empathetic. It makes them more discerning. They don't stop caring. They begin to choose more mindfully where that care goes. They realize that compassion is sacred, not anything to be given away recklessly. What occurs next is what Jung called the individuated self, and it's totally unstoppable. Carl Jung said that the most dangerous are not people who act from unconscious wounds, but people who have transformed their scars into wisdom. The awakened empath highlights this very well. They've been to the lowest point of human cruelty and emerged not shattered, but purified. They comprehend manipulation because they've suffered it. They understand gaslighting because they've escaped it. They can detect emotional vampires since they've been drained by them. This is not crazy. It's what Jung called hard-earned discernment. And here's the moment when everything transforms completely. According to Carl Jung's theory of psychological development, there comes a time when someone stops looking for external completeness and becomes full within themselves. For the betrayed empath, this time is both liberation and revolution. They stop trying to convince people of their value. They stop outlining their boundaries. They stop apologizing for their needs. They gain what Jung called psychological sovereignty, complete ownership of their emotional world. But the final transformation, this is what Jung called the return to the self. And it's really amazing.